what the Midwest Invasive Plant Network is, the acronym is MIPIN. It was founded in 2003, and it was really due to there were some efforts in the Midwest to develop invasive plant councils and educate groups, but there was just a tremendous amount of interest to coordinate efforts across the region with a lot of similar species and similar issues throughout the Midwest. Really lots of interest in coming up with one entity that could provide a lot of the resources across the region. So founded in 2003, and I think the initial founders did an excellent job of framing some of our goals, and we came up with a very clear and I would say aggressive mission statement for MIPIN, and that mission statement was simply to reduce the impact of invasive plants across the Midwest. So quite a challenge indeed, but I think we have had some significant successes since 2003, and we're going to speak in a little bit more detail about one of those successes. Well, I wouldn't be doing due diligence if I didn't show you a map of our region in the Midwest. So you can see here, these are the 8 states that we do work in, specifically highlighted in green. The Midwest Invasive Plant Network is now centered just outside of Chicago, Illinois, in Lisle, Illinois, at the location of the Morton Arboretum, where we've been currently our fiscal sponsor, and we've had a great relationship with the Morton Arboretum out there. And I think it dovetails well with some of the activities that we're going to talk about today. We have a lot of stakeholders that are a part of MIPIN, and we're proud that we're a network. We feel that there's a pretty good two-way flow of information. Some of those stakeholders listed include land managers, various federal, state, and local agency staff members, as well as researchers and educators throughout our region. But we also feel very strongly that the nursery and landscape and restoration industries are also a strong component of our network. Now, you may be wondering what all these little dots are on the screen. These are the locations of members of our MIPIN board, and I would like to emphasize that we take pride in trying to have a diverse board that represents these various partners that we have listed to the right. So we do have active representation from the nursery and landscape industry, as well as land managers and agency staff, as well as researchers and educators such as myself, and try to get them encompassing a wide geographic region. That one dot that looks like it's in the middle of nowhere is actually from our partners in Canada, who we do have that we work closely with. It just looks like they're in no man's land right now, but they actually are a great partner to have on our board as well. So I'd like to introduce our MIPIN coordinator who handles the daily activities of the Midwest Invasive Plant Network, Claire Ryan. She just recently joined us this past December. I've included her phone number and her email. She also has a Facebook and Twitter account. She's been a great addition to our team, and we'll really have some exciting new opportunities that she's helping us develop. And I think one of the biggest assets that I can say about Claire is that she immediately from day one has kind of bought into this concept of developing programs and working with stakeholders, and that's what we're really hoping to share with you today, is how we are really a collaborative network where we're trying to work with people to meet some common goals. And I think that's some of the reasons for our success that we've had over the past 10 plus years. So what does MIPIN do? I think to sum it up easily, we do a lot of things, but I think the easiest way to approach this is we create tools, and we create tools to support invasive plant related activities that I've listed below here. Prevention is one of these tools that we've supported, and one great way is creating documents like this, the Why Should I Care brochure, where we're really trying to educate a wide range of stakeholders, not just the traditional ones, but hunters, recreationalists, gardeners, and others about invasive species, and we've had tremendous success. I believe we're on the 4th or 5th printing of this document. We also are really active in early detection, education, and outreach. We've spent a lot of our resources in early detection because we think it's the best bang for our buck, And lots of other resources have been created to meet that, such as our Invasive Plants of the Midwest Field Guide. We have Keep a Lookout flyers, and then we've been active in the Great Lakes Early Detection Network and actually supporting the reporting of some of these new invaders as they naturalize on our landscape. Last but not least, as we are trying to impact the control and improve the control and management of these invasive species, we actually do quite a bit of programming on control and management. One of those resources or tools that we've developed is the Invasive Plant Control Database, which is a database that houses detailed control information on over 50 species that are common to the Midwest and allows for an interactive search. If you haven't visited that, I'd encourage you to take a look. State-of-the-art information and is easily forwarded on to others so that they could use that information, and it's searchable so that you can fine-tune that information for exactly what you need. Where can you find all this information? Well, you can find it by visiting our website, www.mipin.org. We have a very active listserv. If you can click up here in the upper right-hand corner, you can request to join our listserv. We can get some of the updated information. Lots of other information available, such as our products and publications. Control and management is where you can find the control database. We've got a lot of what's new, resources and events coming up, such as we recently held an Iowa Invasive Species Conference that attracted over 250 individuals from Iowa interested in invasive species and education and outreach. We're also heavily involved in the Upper Midwest Invasive Species Conference, where a lot of this information is housed here as well. So really an excellent clearinghouse for information. We encourage you to visit this website. So now I'd like to kind of change gears and talk about one area of focus that we've been working on since its inception, and really the title of this presentation today is just working with what we're terming the green industry or the ornamental industry to help reduce the impact of invasive ornamental species. I think that they had the forethought to kind of start working on this since our inception, and really our two main goals were to educate the public and to reduce the sales of these known invasive ornamental plants. Many of you are likely having a similar goals and similar programs. So I thought, as approaching this issue, I thought I would kind of give you just a kind of a timeline of how we started to work on this, and then I'm going to talk about these in a little bit more detail. I've included some of the results from each of these various activities, and I'll probably not refer to them much in the timeline, but will as we in more detail as we get through this presentation. Really since our inception through 2013, we had an active committee consisting of MIPIN board members, MIPIN members, as well as members from the green industry to come up with some solutions for this problem. And so we've had this industry in place for this committee in place for 10 years before it got transformed into something else, as I'll show you. And then in 2011, I think mostly in part due to our active work in this committee, we were able to receive some funding from the Donnelly Foundation. As you'll see, that was Chicago-specific funding, but we were kind of, because of our previous work and because of some of our partners, able to justify why we needed to take a regional approach. And so this might be advantageous if you're looking for unique ways to fund some of your other activities, and it allowed us to really take the results from the first effort and really expand it to a wider audience and create some better educational information. And then in 2013, we were fortunate to team up with the North Central IPM Center. They had a grant for working groups on IPM-related issues, and we were able to get several consecutive years of funding to hold these active in-person working groups on ornamental invasive species, which really kind of replaced our Green Committee, which was unfunded. And so it was great to get some funding from the North Central IPM to do some of these great activities, which I'll expand and discuss in more detail. And then what's going to happen at the end of my presentation, we're going to talk about some of our current efforts with Arboretum and public gardens. I'm going to have Kurt Dreisilker, who's also a MIPIN board member and part of the Morton Arboretum, talk about some of that information at the end. And we also have a pending Great Lakes Restoration Initiative to develop some other unique outreach material. We're hoping to hear by the end of this, before this presentation or webinar, but we have not heard the status. So everyone keep your fingers crossed for funding for that project. So when we got started in 2003, and I guess I should back up and really say I'm going to talk about we and make it sound like I've done a lot of this work, and really it was a lot of blood, sweat, and tears by previous and current board members, previous MIPIN coordinators, members of the Green Committee, and as well as stakeholders have done a tremendous amount of this work, and I just get the pleasure of documenting some of this success here today, but really it was a team effort. I want to acknowledge everyone that's been involved in that process. So when they started this Green Committee, they really came up with two strategies. One was to educate consumers about invasive ornamental sales and ornamental plants, and we thought that might be a real easy approach, and we went down that path. But we also recognized that there was another approach that we were very interested in, and that was to encourage legislation to ban the sale of ornamental invasives. And in our region, we've had historically some success in doing that. For example, in the Wisconsin, the state I'm from, multiflora rose and purple loosestrife are banned for sale in the state, and so we thought that we might be able to have success in introducing some regional legislation to different states that can occur. And what we found through our experience and from other people's experiences, there were a lot of problems associated with this, and I'll highlight some of the problems we ran into, but I want to upfront say that there's problems with legislation. One such problem is it antagonizes green industry, and those partnerships can be really fragmented when you're trying to regulate them or propose legislation to regulate them. And we definitely did initially experience some of that. I want to also acknowledge that there's lots of challenges with enforcement, particularly when you're dealing on a regional perspective where different states have different ways that they would enforce these rules and who would enforce those rules. And finally, we also have challenges involving just new species that come out and new cultivars that aren't covered under this legislation. How does this legislation deal with those issues? So I think this whole experience really taught us a lot about the process and some of the pluses and minuses. I think we were very limited in our ability to encourage a legal legislation on a regional level because that legislation has traditionally occurred at a statewide level too. And when we tried to incur some of these regional projects, we ran into many issues associated with that. And I'll briefly mention some of those and be happy to answer some of those questions if you have them later on in this presentation. So we have this green industry that started in 2003 and met through 2013. And really the goal of this was to really build relationships, particularly with the horticultural and landscaping industries. Our goal was to educate them about invasive ornamental species and what some of those impacts that they pose, because we felt, which I believe that they would agree, they weren't very well educated on that issue. But what we found out is that we weren't very knowledgeable about the horticultural and landscaping industry, and we didn't understand how they worked and what some of their triggers were. And so it was, even though we didn't have that as an initial goal, I think that it's a two-way street on how to educate each other about how some of these things do occur. And specifically what we wanted to do is we wanted to develop an agreed upon list of invasive ornamental plants that we would recommend people not purchase. And the Green Industry Committee also wanted to come up with a list of non-invasive alternatives that we could recommend in their place. Sounds like a simple task. That was not a simple task, and did take quite a bit of time and energy to come up with some agreed upon lists. So initially when we started in the first year, from talking to some of those that were involved in that process, it was really challenging to get anything done. We did get partners to the table. We were struggling to always get some of those green industry partners in the same ones, the same table, at the same meetings. When they did get there, they had lots of questions, and a lot of their questions seemed to be about process and specifically about definitions. Lots of discussions about, well, which definition, what's your definition of invasive? Is that definition going to be accepted by every state? Should we use the executive order definition? And it really took, you know, a series of 4 to 5 meetings before we can come to some sort of an agreement on what appropriate definition of an invasive species actually is. May sound like a minor point, but at the time was a very major obstacle. And then some of the other issues I would say I would label really all under trust-related issues. We had questions from industry. They were very concerned that about the process and that it was going to not be rigorous enough to deal with cultivars. And once a species is labeled, we got several comments from industry that they were concerned that all cultivars will be labeled as invasive once that species is. Lots of questions about how we can bring information and new information into this process as well. Industry said, we have data. If we bring this in, can it be shared and will it be trusted? And MIPIN said the same thing. You know, we have information on the invasiveness of periwinkle or vinca, for example. You know, we would like to bring and share this information for you. And some of the industry people didn't necessarily trust that the information that we had was accurate too. So there was a lot of trust issues that we initially had that we had to overcome. And really the best way that we overcame those issues was with time and continued meetings and efforts. And so wanted to emphasize, we started in 2003, and in 2007 we came out with our first product, and this was the MIPIN Landscape Alternatives brochure. We did agree on a list of species, ornamental species we could list as invasive, and we did agree on a list of non-invasive plants that we could recommend as alternatives. There was a lot of negotiations. We did not get all of the plants we felt were invasive. The MIPIN members felt were invasive on that initial agreed upon list. So there clearly was some negotiations as part of that process. But what we found, I think one of the big accomplishments where we started to see a shift is we quickly realized that the green industry really had a lot of knowledge on some of the non-invasive ornamentals that we could list as alternatives. And I think that was the first aha moment that I saw where we found this synergistic development where they could provide something that could really be of benefit. And the green industry really liked that because they felt like they had the ability, they wanted to drive some of the sales to better species that were more appropriate, and this was a good mechanism. So that was the first win-win I think that we had when we got some of that buy-in. And we were able to research those species and ensure that they in fact were not invasive. I should point out that our non-invasive ornamentals includes native and non-native species. And this landscape brochure has been widely distributed, greater than 16,000. We've sold out numerous times, have been distributed since 2007, and we're planning on revising it and reprinting it hopefully sometime in 2017 based on funding and some other issues too. So that was a great success in itself, although it did take 4 years for that to occur. So lots of time and investment up front. And just kind of to pull it apart, this is what it looks like. It would simply list an invasive species, for example, on the top, tree of heaven, Ailanthus altissima, and then list several other alternative species and give a brief comment about some specifics about those species. So very rudimentary, but was able to get the point across and come up with some alternatives, which was clearly something that our stakeholders wanted to provide to gardeners so that they wouldn't purchase an invasive plant, but knew a non-invasive plant species that they could purchase. And really, I think it was the creation of that brochure that kind of launched us down this path and kind of set the stage for a lot of other successes. And the next big event that happened is we got through that process and we realized that, you know, we had some great success in this, but we were struggling to we didn't have any funding to do this. This was all done without any grants. and we just didn't have the resources. So we need to get funding to continue some of our efforts. And, you know, as many of you know, funding is a challenge. Unfortunately, we found out about an organization called the Donnelly Foundation, which is based out of the Chicago region and is interested in funding Chicago-related issues related to natural areas and such. And we were able to work with them, develop a grant to create some additional resources to reduce the impact of invasive ornamentals. And, you know, again, it took us 2 or 3 years to get this funding in place due to some of the communications with the funder, because they were really interested in the impact within the Chicago region. And we were trying to justify that we needed to have a regional response, and we needed to spend a year to educate the Donnelly Foundation that, yeah, many of these invasive ornamental plants that are impacting the Chicago region are coming in through the greater Midwest, and so we need to educate and do outreach material through the whole Midwest to impact the Chicago region. Once we got that point across, they were all in. We were able to get funding to create some additional dialogue with the green industry, create an online video, which I'll talk about in a second, and then update our landscape alternatives brochure into an app. And I think this was probably one of the best things that could happen, because what I've always said is that these brochures are great. When you go to conferences and other meetings, they're the first thing to go and get picked up. But when a customer is going to the store to purchase an ornamental plant, they're rarely going to remember that brochure. But what they probably will remember is a smartphone. So if we can get them to download that app, then they will have that information at their fingertips too. And so I think it was a really neat resource. Thanks to our friends at University of Georgia, we were able to develop both an Android and an Apple iTunes, an Apple app. It's also available on tablets that shows these landscape alternatives. And we were able to not only create this, but also upgrade it and add a lot more features than that simple trifold. I'm just going to briefly show you what some of those results are. Simply what we've done is we added much pretty pictures that we could allow you to search for your invasive species that's potentially ornamental. Over 27 species, allow you to scroll down. Once you click on that species, you see we clicked on Japanese barberry here. Up will come a list of exotic non-invasive alternatives, as you can see here with the blue tab, native alternatives, and then native cultivar alternatives as well too. And then there's also some additional information that's available in those websites that include pictures of what the invasive species are. As you can see at the bottom here, you can swipe, and there's many pictures that can have you confirm its identification, including close-ups that are, thanks to the bugwood, give you some really good information. You can click on the info button, and there's very key pieces of information that can confirm identification as well. So able to add a lot more information on the smartphone app compared to that, that brochure that we initially had. And, you know, some of the information that we can include for those shoppers are some of the ecological threats of why, you know, in this is planted too. But what we're also able to do too is include pictures of the non-invasive alternatives. So we have images, as you can see, descriptions of what these are, so that the purchaser can get a good idea of what these are going to be. And more importantly, if you scroll down, some of the cultivation requirements, which we didn't have in the previous brochure, so that they can understand where is the best fit for this plant, because there may be some specific requirements on where they're planted and such. So I think with the funds we got from this grant, we were able to do a major upgrade to this resource, and it's been highly successful, downloaded tens of thousands of times. One of the other issues that we were able to create, or one of the other things we were able to create, was a video kind of documenting the invasive potential of some of these ornamental plants. And this was really due to some of our initial interactions with the Green Committee, where we would state that certain ornamental plants are showing up and becoming invasive in some of our forests or other natural areas, and simply the industry said, well, we don't believe you. You need to show us. We need to be able to visually see it. We did spend some time showing some of these individuals these sites and realized that we couldn't show everyone, but maybe we can show a video that would highlight what some of these issues are, and that might be able to help. And so out of this came this cultivating awareness, ornamental plants invading natural areas, where we're talking about this issue. We're showing them specific areas where these invasive plants are invading and causing impact and discussing those impacts, and then talking about some of the issues that can be done to mitigate this, such as, you know, not purchasing invasive plants and using this Landscapes Alternatives app that we created too. So this was a great resource. It's free on YouTube. If you type cultivating awareness and MIPIN, it'll show up, and feel free to utilize it as you need for your outreach programs. I think this was another major hurdle that we overcame in educating the green industry about some of these issues. They simply didn't believe us that some of these species were a problem, and to be able to see it visually in these areas really helped get the message and help them understand that these are issues and there is some action that needs to occur. So then following through with, as that Donnelly grant ended, we were fortunate to work with to find out about this working group funding through the North Central IPM group. Obviously, North Central IPM, they're focused on the IPM efforts, but as many of you hopefully know, prevention is one of the key and first steps in a good IPM management strategy or plan. And so we developed a grant that we're funded to develop 3 working group meetings from 2013 through 2015 to kind of emphasize how can we prevent this impact by engaging stakeholders to prevent the sale or reduce the sale of invasive ornamental plants. And we tried to spread these meetings out throughout the region to facilitate a wide range of people that could participate. I think the key issue here too is it was an in-person, face-to-face meeting, and that also was, I think, extremely valuable. We also often conducted these meetings in collaboration with other meetings, and that was valuable because it allowed those participants to get the perspectives of those other conferences. And for instance, in 2013, there was a Natural Areas Conference that this meeting was a portion of, and so many of those individuals got to be a part of that conference. And in 2015, the invasive folks participated in the Plant Propagator Society's conference, the Eastern Regions in Cleveland, and that was a great opportunity for us to come and get exposed to some of their issues and be able to present to their group directly, and then have the working group meeting the next day. So was quite successful from that perspective. And based on interest of the working group, we came up with various topics to discuss in every year, as you can see here. So what were some of the outcomes? Well, I think the 2013 meeting was really successful in that it engaged our stakeholders. This in-person meeting, we had almost equal representation from green industry and natural area, and did have good research individuals to kind of talk about some of those issues. So those were really a plus. And I think it really improved the understanding across those sectors for the land managers. We really documented the distribution, invasion potential, and environmental impacts to green industry. And green industry really impacted to us on how their species supply and demand and marketing worked, which I know, for instance, I didn't know very much about. And I think the most important thing is at this meeting, we were beginning to put faces to names that we were talking to on the phone, and we would have lunch and sit down next to each other and interact. And those interactions, I think, became very crucial because that trust was starting to build. One of the other outcomes of this meeting was to expand that Landscape Alternatives brochure and app and get buy-in from these groups to do that too, which was an important feature. After 2013, we also got funding to do 2 more years of work. In 2014, a lot of comments and interest was present about these risk assessments and how these risk assessments were done, specifically in the Midwestern states, because several states had different risk assessments and asked different questions. And due to this, we were able to run several species through these different risk assessments in the Midwest and show how they came up with these different outcomes. And that research was actually, we discussed that in great detail at this working group meeting, and discussed with the groups the potential if we could come up with a regional assessment or not. And those results that we discussed eventually ended up being published in a research article, Invasive Plant Science and Management. So it was a really great contribution. And essentially what it said is that, you know, different assessments are going to come up with different results, and it's kind of based upon the questions you ask and what the goals of these different assessments are. The goals of assessments in, say, Ohio were very different than the goals of the assessments in Wisconsin. And so it was a very enlightening process. I can say that we were hoping that we could come to some level of agreement to come up with a regional assessment that all groups would agree with. But what became clear out of this meeting is they really wanted those assessments to occur at the state level, because that's where the regulation, if any regulation were to occur, would happen. And the working group really was not comfortable with broadening these assessments to a regional level too. So that was some good feedback that we got out of this, the meeting outcomes. And I would say that that feedback was not only from the green industry, but also from many of the invasive plant researchers, educators, and land managers as well. So again, this was in Indianapolis, this meeting, again, a real positive meeting with lots of benefits. We were also, as a result of this meeting, to again update that landscape alternative app as well. So always trying to add new species as they become available to it, particularly the alternatives. It was a big plus out of this meeting. One of the other things that came out of this meeting as well was a lot of interest in knowing what invasive plant lists are present in the Midwest, and which species were on such lists. And so MIPIN, because of the advice from this working group, set to the task of creating a Midwest invasive plant list, where we list all of the lists in each of our organization states, and we provide information on which species are listed. We will separate the regulated species list versus just say an invasive plant council's list. So there is some separation on which ones have regulatory status and which ones don't. But we thought it really important to develop a clearinghouse where all this information can be viewed at once. And I know a lot of the green industry people really appreciated that, so they could understand the levels of complexity. So here's just a shot from our website that where the invasive plant list is. What you can see is there's lots of brief descriptions, because each state has a different law. Some are, for instance, in Michigan, we have noxious weeds, prohibited plants, and restricted plants. In Illinois, we have Illinois aquatic injurious plant species, Illinois noxious weeds, and then we have lists that are not regulated as well. So it's all very different by the state, but by able to have this interactive list present, it was a real benefit. So here's kind of what it looks like. If you look at the list itself and you just were to scroll down, you can see you can sort by common name or scientific name. And then within each of the states, you can see the level of the legal list, as well as just the invasive plant or other type of list that's been created. And you see the abbreviation present there of what level of listing it's on, either as a law or as a list. This was a Herculean task. It took us, I think, a little over a year to do, and the moment we did it, one of the states updated their list, and so it was out of date the moment that we created it. But I think it's still important to keep updated, and it's really knowledgeable, and has really helped, I think, a lot of the green industry understand which species we're talking about and what states have which issues, because often many of these people are shipping to multiple states as well. Then in 2015, we actually had another meeting, and based on interest, we decided to work with this International Plant Propagators Society, the Eastern region, and we're given basically a one-day slot to talk to them about invasive plants and some of these other issues. And kind of what I've done is just kind of pasted below several of the keynote speakers that we had. We had Mike Yanni from Johnson's Nursery, Teresa Culley, Mark Brand, Kay Havens, and Dia Lawrence, all talking about various aspects of invasive plants, ornamental plants. Sterility was one of the big questions that Mark Brand talked about, and we had regulators of invasive plants give perspectives on sterility and how they're dealt with in their states as well. And I think this was a great conference, and I think what I'd like to point out is I think Mike really set the stage well here by giving this introductory talk talking about how where ecology meets economy and how really invasive plants in the green industry are really very closely linked, and we need to think about each other together. And I think he started this presentation by giving his history on how he became hooked on plants and why he's a plant person. And he used that as a launching point to talk about how interrelated these topics are. And what was really unique about that is every following speaker then gave their story on how they were connected to plants and their history of how they got brought into their love of plants. And I think it really was another one of those aha moments that, hey, we're all plant lovers and we need to come together on some of these issues and try and work together versus working separately on this too. And I think that was a great success that Mike had in highlighting that one issue. So out of that became some really interesting information. MIPIN, as part of our working group, were able to survey the members of this society and ask some really key questions. The first questions we asked is, are invasive plants, ornamental plants, a problem in your state? And we were quite shocked that over 90% of the attendees that labeled themselves, identified themselves as a green industry, agreed that some horticultural plants are becoming invasive in natural areas that they're aware of. And to me, this was a great achievement to show that that message is getting out and they're understanding that invasives are an issue. When we first started in 2003, I think many of them would not have said invasive species are an issue, whereas by far the majority of people who work in natural areas do recognize that this is a problem. However, I would say we still have a way to go when I asked that another question of who should be responsible for funding management for these invasive species. We did get quite a bit of difference. Many of the green industry people felt that the people who are managing the natural areas should fund for the removal, while, as no surprise to you, many of the natural area individuals felt that the individual that sold the plant or created or released it should have some responsibility for funding management. So didn't agree on everything, but I think that this is some key evidence that some progress is being made on this front. We also talked about sterile cultivars in the working group, and is this a viable solution? How should they be regulated? Came up with some suggestions and on future work for that too, and it was a very productive meeting where we were all interested in working together. And I think one of the other outcomes of this meeting that was really successful was this concept of maybe some future work involving herbaria and public gardens as they can be involved in helping us identify some of these potential ornamental plants that may become invasive in the future. And we're going to talk about that in a couple minutes. So currently what we're working now on this public gardens arboreta information, which we'll talk about you in a second. We're going to continue to do these collaborative efforts with stakeholders. We have this GLRI funding that's out in the wings, looking at woody ornamental plants in the Great Lakes area. So we're really hopeful to get funding to launch that. Stay tuned, and we should know fairly soon about that. And we're committed to continuing efforts on this issue and felt that our long-term efforts have not gone unwarranted. It did take a while to get things going, but we have had success. So before we turn it over to Kurt, I'd like to just kind of summarize our decade of plus of efforts. I think that some of the keys to our success was we spent a lot of time to get to know our partners that we wanted to collaborate with, the green industry. It took us 4 years before we had any type of product that we could claim was effective, and I think that that was probably time well spent, although there was a lot of frustrating evenings by several people involved in that project. And I think the other key issue is we learned about their industry and what some of the things that make their industry tick. I think that the other thing that was a challenge was getting full participation. I think it was unrealistic just to ask them to participate in this issue that might potentially cause them to be regulated. And so we struggled for the first year or so to get good participation. But once we developed those relationships, it really helped. And getting those face-to-face meetings, I think, is really where some of that work really started to pay off. And it was a lot more productive from there when we started to more look at each other as partners versus us versus others. And I think the last piece of advice is just the fact that Rome wasn't built in a day. It's going to take time. You need to pick your projects initially carefully, pick ones that you think will be easy to get consensus on the group, and take those small wins and realize that some of these larger wins you may never get, or you may take decades to get to them. And understanding that it's a negotiation, it's not a yes-no situation. That's where we ran into problems where we weren't able to negotiate and understand those others' needs too. So that's a quick overview of what MIPIN has done over the past 10 years. At this point, what I'm going to do is introduce Kurt Dreisilker and turn the power of the webinar over to him. And Kurt's going to talk about some of our current projects with public gardens and Arboretum as being another partner to solve this problem. So Kurt, I will introduce you while you go ahead and take control and switch over the screen. Kurt Dreisilker is the treasurer of the Midwest Invasive Plant Network, and Kurt is also is a member of the Morton Arboretum, where he heads their natural resources division there. He's been involved with the Midwest Invasive Plant Network for several years and is an integral part of this group. So Kurt, why don't you take it away and we can switch screens.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark. Bear with me as I get this into position here. I trust that everybody can hear me okay, and that's based on our previous trial. So beforehand, it sounded like everybody could hear me okay, so I'm going on that assumption here. So thank you, Mark, for introducing me. My name is Kurt Dreisilker. I'm the head of natural resources with the Morton Arboretum. We are located just outside of Chicago, Illinois, about 25 miles outside of the city, in a city called Lisle, Illinois. And I'm the head of natural resources here, as well as the MIPIN treasurer. And I've been involved with the Midwest Invasive Plant Network for about 5 years now. So if I can get my screen to move to the next one here. There we go. So the title of today's seminar here is Working with Industry on Reducing the Spread of Invasive Ornamental Plants. And I just wanted to point out that industry in this particular section of the webinar is going to focus more on public gardens, as the Morton Arboretum is one of many public gardens throughout the United States and throughout the world. This is the industry sector that we're going to focus on, that I'll be focusing on in this in the next few minutes here. And so the initiative that I've been working with Midwest Invasive Plant Network on is kind of listed there in the 4th bullet point there. It's called Plants on the Move, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few more slides. But I thought it would be helpful to first describe a little bit more about what the Arboretum does, and particularly my role with the Arboretum. And this will provide context of how invasive species are managed within our Arboretum, and then kind of broadening that to discuss the role of public gardens at large and how invasive species can be managed across the whole industry. And then by providing all that context, I'll kind of move right into this initiative that is called Plants on the Move, that we've been working with MIPIN and Ohio Invasive Plants Council. So the Morton Arboretum is technically a living museum of trees. And if you were to come out to the Morton Arboretum, and you're all invited, We have 1,700 acres of property, and about half of the property is devoted to these collections of trees and gardens. And in that acreage, we have over 222,000 living plants within these collections. There are about 75 of these collections, and we divide them up into taxonomic collections like the elm collection or the oak collection. But we also have geographic collections like the plants of Asia or the plants of Europe and so on. And we have other collections as well. And these plants come from all over the world, and you can see 43 countries listed there in the bullet point are represented in these collections. So a living museum of trees, shrubs, and other plants. As I mentioned, all of those collections are housed within about half of the acreage of the Arboretum, but then focusing on the other half of the Arboretum, roughly half of the Arboretum, we have natural areas. And so here are just a couple of images of the natural areas within the Arboretum. We have tallgrass prairie, we have woodlands, oak woodlands, we have wetlands, and a river which essentially bisects the Arboretum. And so this is, of course, where I spend a great deal of my time managing these natural areas. Managing invasive species is a core component of my role. We have many different species that we manage throughout the Arboretum. And so wandering through the prairies and the woodlands and controlling those invasive species are really, that's really a central, one of the central components of my role. As you can imagine, working within a public garden, managing natural areas, managing invasive species within those natural areas can bring an added layer of complexity because of those collections that I mentioned earlier. And so we'll get to talking about that in just a second. If we think about all of the different pathways of invasions, horticulture is one of those pathways. And so horticulture has been documented as one of the primary pathways of invasion. And so this ties in with us working within the Morton Arboretum as a public garden, because we have horticulturists and curators and people focusing on maintaining this public garden that we're working in. And so we can also look at some of the literature and note that horticulture accounts for 62% of the invasive tree and shrub species from around the world, 82% of the woody species naturalizing within the United States. And if we look at the Morton Arboretum, 100% of the woody invasive species that I manage here at the Arboretum have some sort of origin in horticulture. And that's not to say that the plants that we've been planting throughout the Arboretum have been just spreading around and causing a mess here. Plants have moved around both within the Arboretum and have come into the Arboretum from outside the Arboretum. And so plants are moving around, and so how do we deal with this issue? It's a primary concern for us. And in fact, when looking at some of these papers and having discussions with people, sometimes people can associate us as being the bad guy as a public garden. And admittedly, working for an institution like the Morton Arboretum, I get a little defensive. And so I can say that all the folks that I work with, you know, nobody's intentionally introducing invasive species. And so I just wanted to make a point, because when looking at the mission of the Arboretum, listed right here, the mission of the Morton Arboretum is to collect and study trees, shrubs, and other plants from around the world, to display them across naturally beautiful landscapes for people to study and enjoy, and to learn how to grow them in ways that enhance our environment. Our goal is to encourage the planting and conservation of trees and other plants for a greener, healthier, more beautiful world. Nowhere in there does it say that we're going to do any sort of introduction of invasive species, or are we intending to do any harm, you know, related to this issue. And so this mission statement stands true since the beginning of the Arboretum when we were founded in 1922. So for almost 100 years, this mission statement has largely been intact, and you know, has been a core component of what we're doing, of course, with our mission statement. So I think one of the points is that we've been able to learn more about how these particular species have been moving around over the years and over the decades and have become ultimately problematic. So our understanding of plant invasions has changed, although our mission statement hasn't. So over the years, what we've been able to do at our public garden is adapt our management. And so now what we do is we have a ranking list where we assess the woody species that are found naturalizing within the Arboretum and that are also found outside of the Arboretum in Northeast Illinois. And what we essentially have is a list of woody plant species grown or documented by the Morton Arboretum. This list will actually instruct us on how to manage our living collection. And when we find that a certain species is becoming problematic, then we can take action to remove it, for example. So within our list, there are guidelines on what we will need to do once we find that the plants are spreading around. This list utilizes the Arboretum's resources, such as the living collections, all of the plants that are planted out into the landscape, the plant records that we've maintained for the almost 100 years of our existence, when plants were brought into the Arboretum, when they passed away, or when they died, or when they were deaccessioned, to speak in museum speak, and so on. All of those records are included here in part of this, in our understanding of the plants in the ranking list here. But we also have a lot of staff members that have different experiences, different observations from many different programs within the Arboretum that are also built into this list as well. We have an herbarium on site with thousands of different plants stored, and so a lot of these species are contained in the herbarium and provide an excellent source of information about plants moving through the landscape. And then also we certainly have regional contacts that we can reach out to when we have questions about a particular species and how it's behaving in other areas outside of the Arboretum. And so the bottom line, at this point, we have 88 species of trees, shrubs, and vines on our list. And so really this is an operational component of what we do within the Arboretum. So right now we don't have invasive species accessioned or planted into our landscape. We've been removing these as we learn that these are actually problematic species. So we've been removing them over the years. And here's an example of one that we have removed. The calorie pear, and as a matter of fact, all of the cultivars have been removed from our collection. These two images show the same few trees that were planted right at the front entrance of the Arboretum. We also had a number of them planted elsewhere throughout the garden, and we've removed all of those based on all of the mounting evidence that told us that this particular species was indeed becoming problematic. So the calorie pear is an example of a plant that many people can see wandering through the eastern U.S. landscape, but that may not be such a surprise to hear that we've removed this from our collection. But I just want to point out that we have other more obscure species within our collection that have also been removed that probably a lot of people don't even know about or maybe have never even heard of, such as this one, the Chinese silk vine. This particular plant was planted in a couple of different areas and was causing problems in the area where it was planted. And what we ended up doing is removing that from the collection so that it wouldn't become problematic in the future. So just an example of a more obscure species there. And so over time, you can see that we've actually removed hundreds of species or hundreds of individual plants that were becoming problematic or that were declared invasive throughout the Arboretum. So here's just a quick chart that shows you by year how many we've removed from 1988 all the way through 2015 in this case. So if we think about the Morton Arboretum as one example of a public garden dealing with this particular issue of plants that are installed into the garden landscape, these plants can move around and start to spread around and kind of escape cultivation. The Morton Arboretum is just one example of this of a public garden. Other gardens undoubtedly have the same sort of scenarios unfolding throughout their own gardens. So public gardens can be seen as sort of a ground zero for plants escaping cultivation. We may have just one or two individual plants that are planted into a collection, and then we can see over time that these plants are escaping, and maybe a few individuals are popping up outside of the cultivated area. And so this is interesting information to capture, and that's the sort of information that we capture within our list that I described earlier. And perhaps other gardens could do the same thing. And in fact, I know other gardens do at least similar activities within their own operation. Public gardens can also be seen as a sort of a neutral party, providing scientific research and good observations about what's happening within their own gardens, and sharing that information with constituents. Many people, thousands of people actually call up our plant clinic here at the Morton Arboretum, and they want to know information about different species, and so we can give out this information about what we are finding with these particular species, for example. And public gardens overall can be leaders in an effort to prevent plant invasion. And what do I mean by this? When we do find that some of these plants that are actually installed into our gardens and landscapes, and when we find that they are spreading around, we may be able to step into the spotlight and take action by cleaning up any particular seedlings or any plants that are spreading or escaping cultivation. And instead of sort of sweeping this information under the rug and kind of acting like it never happened, I think we can step out into the light and actually share this information with others, so that way we can work together to prevent plants from becoming invasive in the future. And so that leads me to the point that I'm trying to make here about an event that we coordinated with Midwest Invasive Plant Network and the Ohio Invasive Plants Council. This event was called Plants on the Move, and it's how public gardens can help control invasive plants. So this was essentially a two-day symposium and a working group meeting that we held last November. The first day was a symposium open to the public, which included speakers from different gardens, such as Morton Arboretum, Chicago Botanic Garden, Desert Botanical Gardens, Botanic Gardens Conservation International, University of Cincinnati, Tropical Botanical Garden, New York Botanical. Okay, so a lot of different gardens presenting during this all-day symposium. And then on day two, we had a working group session for garden staff and curators, horticultural staff, and directors from all these different gardens that came into the Arboretum as they attended this two-day session. And really, the second day was meant to discuss how gardens deal with plants escaping cultivation in their own home gardens. And this was really well represented. We had over 50 people attend this two-day event, and representatives from 23 different gardens across the United States and Canada came together to discuss how gardens monitor, manage, and share information on plants escaping from cultivation within their own garden. And so during the working group, we asked questions like, what does it mean to you in your home garden when a plant escapes cultivation? And how do you deal with that sort of situation? Do you remove the mother plant, or do you remove the seedlings? I mean, it was a full day full of questions and good conversation based on these questions. And so the goal is really to recommend how public gardens and Arboretum can collaborate on taking a leadership role in stopping plants from escaping cultivation and then becoming invasive. And the idea is to hopefully develop a network of or a communication tool or device where garden curators and staff can report plants escaping cultivation and coordinate those efforts with colleagues around the region or even beyond the region throughout the country, for example. Because right now, there really isn't such a thing. When a person within one garden is curious about a certain plant's behavior, they may just have to pick up the phone or email somebody, one of their colleagues in another garden nearby or across the country, to investigate how that particular species is performing within their own garden elsewhere. And so the idea, I think, is that this outcome will be some sort of a tool that can be shared with people in the garden sector especially, but then also opened up to a broader community so that people can understand how plants are performing within these particular situations. And then just to point out that when we think about the invasion curve, a lot of us dealing with invasive species are dealing with those particular species when we're on the kind of the right side of this invasion curve, when the population is so high and the area occupied is so extensive that it costs a lot of money to divert our resources to control those particular species. But the effort that we're thinking about in this garden conversation is really aimed more towards the left-hand side of this chart, where we're looking at the prevention and the eradication components. And so some of these plants that are in our gardens may just be escaping cultivation in such small numbers and small populations that we may not even consider them invasive yet. But the goal would be to control those particular species before they actually become problematic and invasive on a larger scale. So now what? Now that we held this meeting back in November, we are in the midst of writing the summary of the symposium and the working group. And so the group of us hosting this meeting are compiling this right now and aim to have this back out with some key findings and recommendations of this group back out into the hands of the participants of our meeting. And then once we make sure that we characterize the whole essence of the meeting correctly and we're not missing any details, we would send it out to a broader audience of especially the garden industry to make sure we gain the buy-in from other gardens around the country and make sure that we gain the trust that's really needed, and like Mark was referencing earlier, so that this whole effort can move along and it's coordinated and effective down the road. And then, once we have that all compiled and we make sure it's correct, then we'll disseminate that out to a much broader audience as well down the road. So that's about all I have to update you about one of the more recent events that MIPIN has been involved with. And I think with that, I will open it up to questions. And I think I'm going to turn it to Liz or Mark. Are you both there?
I'm unmuting myself to read you off some questions here. We have a few. Mostly you have some kudos. First question is, in your alternatives app, why did you include native cultivars?
So this is Mark, and I'll take that one. It was quite a extensive discussion that we had. Ultimately, the goal of our app was to provide non-invasive alternatives. And in discussions with green industry, these native cultivars became kind of an interesting side topic, and we felt it prudent that to include them if they've and list them separately than natives, because they are actually cultivars of the native. And so we felt like they needed a unique definition. And I think industry brought up some really good points that some of these, we call them nativars, actually have some unique characteristics that a lot of the industry, the gardeners really appreciate. So we felt like it was warranted to include them and give them their own section, so to speak. So that was the primary thought behind that.
Okay. Next question. Might public garden reporting to be shared across the country be entered into EdMaps?
Yeah, I think that was in fact one of the ideas that came up in the meeting as an option of how this might be reported. I guess there were other options as well, and the working group really was trying to focus on what information ought to be recorded, and how would that be recorded, and then also, is there some tool such as EdMaps, for example, that might already exist that we don't need to reinvent? And so EdMaps was considered, and it still may be considered in the future. Right now, we're still kind of working through this and trying to figure out the best way to do this. So that's a good suggestion.
Okay, another question. From experience with purple loosestrife, I learned that sterility is likely impossible. Have advances been made in this area?
So I'll address that. I'm by no means a sterility expert, but we did have a really good meeting that discussed the ins and outs of sterility, and it's a challenge. I think that industry is up for the challenge, and they're actively breeding for sterility. Complete 100% stable sterility is really the challenge that they face, and I think we're yet to have that ultimately documented in any of our woody ornamentals, but in talking to several of the breeders, they are optimistic that in the future they will be able to get to some level of near stable sterility. And so a lot of the questions of our working group kind of shifted from 100% sterility to what level of sterility is needed. For example, in the state of Oregon, they actually have a state law for a species. If it can have a 95% reduction in seed viability, they consider it sterile. So that definition of what sterility is and the stability of it is an interesting issue that probably different states are going to take up in the future and come up with different definitions of what that may be from a regulatory standpoint. Kurt, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that was good, Mark. I think you captured that pretty well.
Okay, next question. Please explain costs of landscape alternatives app and ongoing maintenance costs.
Oh, yeah. So we teamed up with the University of Georgia and Chuck Bargeron, who worked with him to develop the app, and we factored in some of the costs to develop that app. And then we've just, to be honest, been maintaining it without recouping any costs. So we wanted to make sure it was available for free so that people would download it and there wouldn't be any barriers to them using it. And we've just kind of incurring those costs for upkeep. Some of those costs we're putting into some of our other grants, but to be honest, we're just covering that in some of our general funds. We have submitted in several of our grants money to upgrade those, and that's where and that's what we're hoping we're going to be able to get to add some of the new species, particularly some of the aquatic garden plants is what's on our list to add, which we've recently gotten some funding for. So it's a challenge, but we didn't want to have any barriers, so we didn't want to charge for the app. And it's just been great to work with Chuck Bargeron and Bugwood to help develop this, and it's been really successful.
Okay, next question. Would the horticultural industry be open to creating a voluntary fund to help pay for invasive control and EDRR?
So that topic has not come up in discussions that I've been present in. I think what our experiences have been in dealing with the horticultural industry as a whole is while they do have some national and regional boards, there are a lot of companies that are fairly independent and while there may be an opinion on an issue that a national or regional group has, that's not to say that some of the big industries do agree with that. And so we have not broached that topic. It would be an interesting topic to broach to them. And I think just thinking from my experiences, particularly with our Wisconsin growers, I think it would be a challenge and it would be a long process to try and see if we could get some of that funding in place. I think maybe some of the larger retailers, some of the box stores may be more likely candidates than the actual industry individuals themselves. That's just my personal opinion. I think it's a great idea. We just haven't pursued it in much detail.
Okay, this is not a question, but rather some folks were interested in acquiring a copy of the assessment comparison report.
Yeah, so if they'd like a copy of that assessment, it's a scientific article, journal article. If you do not have access where you can download a copy, you can email myself. In my email, you can see at the bottom of the screen, mrenz@wisc.edu, and I can email you a personal copy. Because of copyright issues, we can't publicly post it on the MIPIN website.
Okay, at this time I don't see any new questions. If you guys want to hang out and just see if any more pop up, we have a little bit of time.
Yeah,
Sure.
well, again, I would just say thank you. I'll be able to be on here for another 5 minutes or so. Kurt, you going to be able to hang out for another 5 or 10 minutes?
Yes, I will.
If not, enjoy the rest of your day.
Somebody was interested in knowing the name and publication source of the assessment.
Good question. So it's the publication is Invasive Plant Science and Management is the journal. And I would have to look up and get you what the reference is. Probably the easiest thing is just to email me, and then I can email you exactly the citation and the link to that. Teresa Cully, who is also one of the primary authors in that, you could contact her as well. She's been very active in this process too. But probably just the easiest thing to do is send me an email and I'll make sure you have the critical information. I just don't have it on my fingertips or at my fingertips.
Another question was, when will this presentation be archived and available for industry members to view? I just wanted to let you know that I am recording it and that I will place it on YouTube and provide you with a copy.
Okay, well, hearing no more questions, I think we're going to sign off. So thanks again for everyone for listening. If you're interested in some of the information, feel free to send me an email, mrenz@wis.edu. You can see on the bottom of your screen, and feel free to visit our website, www.mippen.org, as well as our Facebook and Twitter accounts. And we look forward to hearing from you in the near future, and have a great day.